I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 214 of the podcast. Rochester Rising and our weekly podcast launched in 2016 to amplify stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. We believe in something we call inspiration capital, telling real, authentic stories of people building, growing, or scaling their businesses in Rochester, Minnesota, because we think if you don't see something or hear something, you don't know that it's a pathway available to you. We come out with a new podcast every Wednesday, which you can listen into on our website, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, YouTube, or really wherever you listen in to podcast content. And then the next day, on Thursday, we have an article that's released based on the podcast, which you can check out on our Rochester Rising website at rochesterrising.org. And we really encourage you to check in with both the weekly podcast and our article. Rochester Rising is the storytelling arm of Collider, which is a Rochester-based nonprofit that supports early-stage entrepreneurs. On the podcast today, I had a very fun chat with Brandon Hendrickson, who is the founder of Science is Weird. We recorded this podcast a few weeks ago in person during one of the largest blizzards we've had this year here in Minnesota. The podcast was recorded wearing masks, which you'll definitely be able to hear in the podcast, especially from me. But we recorded it in person in a safe way, which was a lot of fun. I was really excited to talk with Brandon because I had heard such great things about Science is Weird and his alternative for adults called Science and Beer. Brandon is a Collider co-working member, so I had known him from working in our co-working space, which he joined during the pandemic. And since we recorded this podcast, I did get to participate in his latest Science and Beer session, which was focused around answering the question, why do clouds float? And it was very, very fun. I encourage everyone to check out the next Science and Beer. It's held on a Thursday evening once a month, so you can find information about that on the Science is Weird Facebook page. So check it out, connect, and support, and learn more about local entrepreneurs here in the community. Okay, so a little bit more about Brandon. So on the show today, we got to talk with Brandon Hendrickson, who is the owner of Science is Weird. Brandon is originally from Milwaukee, but he spent time in Arizona and most recently Washington State before moving with his family to Rochester last summer in 2020. He grew up with undiagnosed ADHD and actually actively avoided science classes all the way through college. He really cut his teeth in teaching, especially in homeschool teaching, while in Seattle, where he really got to experience and figure out how to make subjects fascinating to kids. What started out as a Facebook post to teach virtual lessons during spring break last year has transitioned into what is now Science is Weird, which is an online learning platform to teach the basics of science to kids in a way that Brandon did not feel he had growing up. Each Science is Weird session starts with a riddle and allows kids to work together toward the answer. This was such an engaging conversation with Brandon today as we talk about the value of experimentation, the adventure of entrepreneurship, and getting ridiculously excited about what you're doing, the value of community, and so much more. So we'll launch right into today's podcast with Brandon Hendrickson of Science is Weird. Thanks for coming in and doing this today in the middle of probably our worst blizzard that we've had so far.
I've got to say that one of the reasons that my wife and I moved to town was just to take advantage of the unspeakably grand snow removal system that Rochester has. It was just amazing. Driving down on Broadway, I saw driving north this phalanx of giant snowplows coming north, and like the image that I had was being a tiny piece of snow on the ground and like looking at all of these things coming at me and realized like there was no hope. There was no hope for me. It was like what it must have been like to be a soldier in the King of Persia's army, like watching the phalanxes of Alexander the Great advance or something like that. Nice job, Rochester snow removal.
I think it's funny when you see the snow going in trucks down just Broadway, and then it just like disappears. I think they put it in a lake in Silver Lake or something, but I'm not 100% sure about that, and I'm sure someone's gonna tell me that I'm wrong.
Oh my gosh,
but
where does the snow go?
I don't know.
I've never asked that before.
That could be.
That's it. Wow, jeez. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
It goes somewhere, and why?
Yeah. Why
don't
that
we
place?
Just leave it?
Also, like, what are the effects of having it in that place? You know, like, then it goes somewhere else too. And granted, like gravity and like water, like tries to find the lowest spot, etc. But like, it's gotta have effects.
Now you're thinking.
Sorry. No, if I'm distracted for the entire rest of the interview, it's like a third of my brain is working on that problem.
So, I wanted to start out learning a little bit more about you and sharing that with the listeners. So, can you share a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What are some of your favorite hobbies, interests, passions? So basically, what makes you you? I know that's a big question. I tried to direct it a little bit.
Good, easy. Yeah, thank you for throwing me a softball at the beginning of this. I am from Milwaukee. I was born outside of Milwaukee, and I grew up with undiagnosed ADHD, which was a joy and a pleasure at that stage of my life because my parents just sort of let me spend a bunch of time doing whatever the heck it was that I wanted to do, which for me was immersing myself in books. So just like going to the library every week and coming out with a few bags worth, right, to tote over to our minivan. I'm always embarrassed when people ask about my hobbies. I feel like I read books and I talk about books and I drink beer with friends who also like to talk about books, and that's about it. Teaching, I think, for me is maybe an outlet for all of that. Like it's a way of sort of channeling some of like the coolest things that I find out about in books for a broader audience.
I would say reading was my hobby growing up, and I even had my own library and a stamp with my name on it that said like Library of Amanda Leitner. It's somewhere still, like I'm sure, because nothing ever disappears.
Did you ever try to like learn the Dewey Decimal numbers so that you could put your own books in the Dewey Decimal
I'm
order?
sure I did at one point because I loved the library. Like they just let me keep books at one point because
What?
Yeah. When I was in high school, they just let me keep some of the books, but bring them back. But like, we had to write a report every week on one of the presidents as we were going through. So they just let me keep the book for the school year because nobody else wanted it.
Wow.
So yeah, I lived in the library. Before I could get a job, my mom made me volunteer in the library.
Oh.
So I loved it. I love books. Don't get to read so much anymore, but yeah, maybe still like 30 to 40 a year, which isn't too bad for an adult.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. I wrote out a list of all of the 2-week periods until I turn 78, which is when actuarial tables estimate that I shall expire. And my goal is to purchase a new book every 2 weeks and to choose those really well, right, because I have this limited number, this Google spreadsheet and all that for that. But that only puts me at like 26 books or so a week if I'm doing that math right. Or a year.
Yeah, like 26 a week's pretty good.
Yeah. And then like the goal is like to read them deeply because I'm kind of limiting what I can do, sort of like a Kanban for lifetime reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of the library. Love the Rochester Public Library. I probably go there once a week to get a book or something. Yeah, they've been a wonderful resource to have in the community.
Especially during COVID, yeah.
They've been wonderful. I mean, there was only like a month where they weren't available at all. And now, I mean, I get cookbooks there, I get DVDs there, if anyone has, but I mean, there are some things you just can't find, so I love it. So I wanted to ask you as well about your relationship with science. So how did you get interested in science? And I know I read your story, which was wonderful, and I feel like I had a lot of the same feeling as that when I was little, and I even have a PhD in molecular biology. When I was little, I didn't get it. Didn't resonate with me at all.
What do you think was missing for you?
Well, this is probably going to sound strange, but maybe not. I think, growing up in the early 90s, science wasn't for girls. It wasn't. There were no role models, and it was, the same thing as, like, coding. That wasn't even And I didn't go to a very great high school, so none of that, like, it wasn't even an opportunity. But then I went to a highly technical college, so I don't know how that happened. But it wasn't until then that I felt science was more accessible to me as a girl growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s. But at that point, it's already too late by the time you get to college. It's pretty late.
Apparently you did well enough for yourself to get a PhD in molecular biology.
Sure. Not using it, but...
If I had it all to do over again, I'd go back and get a bachelor's degree in biology, which is this idea that I can't get out of the back of my head. At some point, like when I retire, I may go and get a bachelor's degree in biology.
You could do it, yeah. You could do it for sure.
I grew up... I think this is when my, like, I think this is where the ADHD that I so in retrospect obviously had as a kid but didn't get diagnosed until I was an adult comes into it, because I just got to pursue my own, weird little idiosyncratic interests, which to me actually included a lot of science things, dinosaurs maybe specifically, but like, is there a Loch Ness monster? Things like that. And that was no part of the school science curriculum. And so in school, like when we do science, it wasn't that I had bad teachers. It wasn't that, it just was that science was not taught in this way that caught my attention, that caught my imagination, that made me sort of passionately love it. History sort of weirdly was, and so I became a history major in college and actively avoided science classes when I was in high school and in college. Studied world religions. That was really interesting to everybody probably, but to me especially. And then after I graduated, I just happened to, start, like, I sort of fell into this series of books, this genre, this subgenre of books that I think a lot of people, if the New York Times bestselling list is any sign, also really love, books by, like Carl Sagan, Richard Feynman, Steven Pinker, E.O. Wilson, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, the sort of pop science books that are not dumb science books that actually do cut down really deep to what is really going on with a thing. Maria Mudd Ruth's book, A Sideways Look at Cloud, maybe the best book in that canon. And just like really kept wondering, like, why have none of the science classes that I've taken been this interesting? I got into science by reading, books, my way of getting into everything, I suppose, and kept wondering, like, what is it about the way that we have forged our ideas of what a science class should be that makes them, I won't even say, like, the usual things like terribly boring, right? Because oftentimes they're not terribly boring, but even, like, when they're good, they too seldom manage, like, really, like, grab you by the emotions and shake you and say, like, this is something important that everyone should know. And then help you, like, step by step, get to a really profound, deep, wide understanding of a phenomenon. So often, right, like the 10 billionth person to say this, but science classes fall into the trap of giving this sort of like middle level of knowledge, so the answer will be surface tension, but it will not actually go deeper, than that. So seldom did the science classes that I did take, did they get down to like the really like deep reasons that anything happens.
Yeah. We always call that like regurgitation. Like you're just learning something to regurgitate an answer, but not really understanding the why. Or like you said, feeling that emotional attachment to the subject of why it matters. You're just memorizing it, something to get to the next stage of whatever that is.
This is where I feel like it is. This is such one of the things that makes Rochester terrifying is the realization that if I throw a pine cone, it is going to bounce off of the head of somebody with an MD and then bounce off the head of somebody with a PhD before it hits the ground, or maybe like one person who has both of those.
This is a true story. I was running the Med City half marathon a few years ago. Someone whipped out, they got a phone call or a page, whipped out their phone. They were a physician running. And they were like, I'm running whatever, the Med City Marathon. Can I call you back? And it's like, well, I feel pretty safe. Like,
if I drop over here, one of these 10 people around me will be able to take care of it.
See, that's a situation where it's really makes you feel safe, right? But then, like, saying something for me, like, I wasn't interested in science classes, or like I actively avoided science classes when I was in high school and college, I feel like it makes me like this doofus ignoramus around here, and yet I feel like there has been this weird advantage that I've had to coming into these things stupid, right? Really interested in like all these different facets of science, but like really not having this careful, systematic understanding of, like, for example, like why is water wet, or like, you know, when I lose weight, where does the weight go, right? Which is like, I understand, like, are things that most of my friends who have PhDs and MDs, like, you know from the back of their head. But for me, like, to get to discover these things and to get to interrogate, you know, friends of mine who have PhDs now, to really understand this, like this coming at it fresh from this kind of like childlike perspective, you know, because it's not like kids are dumber than the rest of us. They just have less experience and they know less. I'm quoting somebody when I say that. So I get to sort of recapitulate the sort of childlike wonder of the world right here.
You know, I just had this conversation with someone a few weeks ago about how really the best educators, they're not the experts. They're kind of the people still discovering, and the people with more of the inquisitive, creative minds, because then you can actually convey that information to somebody learning the material better than if you've been an expert in this field for 20, 30, 40 years. So yeah. I think it's that perspective, and because often the experts, the MDs, the PhDs, they can't teach that because they don't know how to anymore. They've kind of lost touch with how to explain that to somebody who's learning.
Yeah.
So
the Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker calls this the curse of knowledge, which is, you know, just like once you know something so well and you forget what it's like to have no idea what all these terms mean, right? And like all these, like all this background knowledge that the rest of us take for granted. It's really hard to do that. One of, I think, the other advantages that I've had in this is that you teach what you know, and when what you know is the way that you've been taught a topic before in the sort of pressed out, systematic, hyper-efficient way, then that's what you teach. And it's nice, the way that we structure our classes is to take just one topic every month. So we just finished up cats. Next month is going to be volcanoes. Before that it was eyeballs. Before that it was viruses. Before that it was ice cream. And go in ludicrous depth of that topic. Viruses actually ended up being too broad of a one. Ice cream was great. Cats was great. Eyeballs was perfect. And just press so deep in every lesson, do nothing more than asking one simple question that kids usually can ask themselves. Like for cats, one of them was, why are cats cute? And then just pressing that and not letting go until we'd found out the absolutely deep biological evolutionary answer to that, which is, you know, really, really complicated and wonderful. But if I had, you know, learned concepts like neoteny in college and learned developmental biology and embryology and evo-devo and all of those things, I think I would not be able to teach by just immersing so deep in one riddle, which is, you know, what I get the chance to do now.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up in Milwaukee. You spent a lot of time, or some time, in Washington State, and now we're back to Rochester. So what was kind of that journey like, and what brought you back here this summer, right?
Yeah, the entire course of my life has been operating on the simple principle of pursue shiny objects. And there's another jag actually there for 7 or 8 years into Arizona. I got my couple of bachelor's degrees from Arizona State. They have a really fantastic honors college because there's a really deep sort of grounding in the humanities. But I went there because I got a free ride to college because I happened to do really well on my SAT. And then I became an SAT coach because I didn't have a teaching degree, because I had chosen my majors of world religions and in history by choosing the shiniest classes for me. And then I realized that I wanted to do more than just teach SAT classes, and so I started with the local homeschooling community in Washington. We moved to Washington State by that point, teaching just like the oddest, in retrospect, like classes that make no sense together, like no sort of like connective tissue between, okay, oh goodness, world history, European history, big history, American history, the psychology of happiness, the psychology of evil, a class on meta-ethics, right? Like what is it exactly philosophically that makes something wrong, and on basic philosophical worldview positions, classes on world religions, classes on sociology, anthropology, classes on things that I'm now forgetting. But I'll just like being able to be in a situation in the homeschooling community inside of Washington State where I could just, choose to offer a class on something that I was really passionate about, and I had the hankering that the kids would be really interested in. To get to offer that. And sometimes, tons of kids would sign up, and it'd be really great, and sometimes very few kids would sign up, and such is the life of an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. But that sort of experience of getting to cut my teeth in teaching from this really like broad level in relatively small classes of kids who are opting in to be there, in retrospect, was really fantastic training for just getting to get good at the skill of connecting something that kids only kind of know about and only kind of are interested in, to taking that and making it fascinating to them and making them really care about that subject, which is, now I get to do that with science. Sorry, you'd asked though, why Minnesota? Why Rochester? My wife and I have wanted to homeschool since before she was pregnant, and we couldn't do it financially in the Seattle area. Just nothing against the Seattle area. Part of what makes it really wonderful, the things that make other people really want to live there, and so the housing prices there were just becoming through the roof. And we realized at some point, we probably on 2 teachers' salaries will never be able to homeschool, and so decided to move back to the Midwest. She's from various parts of North Dakota, and so Minnesota was this compromise position for us. And then we had this summer, not this last summer, but the summer before, where we just put our kids in the van and drove all around southeastern Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin and checked out a bunch of big towns, and camped to the south of Stewartville here, and just really fell in love with Rochester. So that, I guess the one word is the one sentence answer is to homeschool, which now we get to do, and it's wonderful for our specific kids.
So we wanted to talk about science is weird, and we've been mentioning it a little bit. Can you share, for people not familiar with it, what is science is weird, and what's kind of the big picture with that?
Science is Weird started as me throwing up on Facebook, hey, I have a week free because of my school's spring break. Would anyone like me to teach their kids a week of really intensive, awesome classes on the physics of water?
And this was this summer.
This was this last spring.
Last spring.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So 2019.
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
The school that my wife and I used to work at, we ran a classroom together, and I was the curriculum architect of this little startup school outside of Seattle, inside of Bellevue, Washington. We were I believe we tied for the second elementary school in the nation to go all virtual because of COVID.
Oh yeah, I have a friend who teaches around Seattle as well, and they were way early.
Do you remember the Life Care Center of Kirkland, where a lot of the early cases in the United States were? That was our block.
Oh,
Not
that's
there's like
scary.
our upstairs neighbors, who our son was best friends with their kid. They used to work there.
Oh.
And so I, was very much, I think dispositionally, I'm one to naturally poo-poo, talk of scary things. And then when I realized it's coming from upstairs, it was this really wow moment. So we and the school was an international school, and with a lot of Chinese population. And so we were very close. The school was very closely watching what was going on in China. Mm-hmm. So we switched to being virtual. This was exciting for me because I'd never got to teach lessons before virtually, so I realized I had to come up with a whole sort of new way of teaching online. And then we had a spring break week, and I got to offer up these classes online to any of my friends' kids or whatever, and we said we'd run the class if we had 10 kids, and we had about 30 kids want to sign up for it, so we thought, okay, we have something here. Mm-hmm. And then we sort of expanded those through the course of the spring and the summer. I found a way of just kind of regularly offering those. And now, I'm not working there anymore. We've moved, and we're doing just this. So what Science is Weird classes actually are. What these aspire to be, what I aspire to do with these, is to give a grounding in all of the beautiful basics of science that I never had growing up, and that would have been really, really helpful to me as I've tried to make sense of the world since then. The way that I realized really quickly on in this that the only way of doing an online class is not, like you said, not to lecture, because my goodness, right? Maybe a passionate lecturer can survive in person when you have all of the force of one's potential charisma sort of on offer, but over Zoom, this tinny sort of internet connection, everything is cut out. So you need to use the big gears of how learning works, which for us, what we figured out is every lesson to just ask one simple riddle. So things like, why is water wet? Or if you lose weight, where does it go? Or how much does fire weigh? Right? The sort of question that makes you go, wait, what? How? Nothing. Wait, anti-nothing, right? Fire has an anti-weight because it goes up in the air.
Or where does the snow go?
Yeah. And then to absolutely refuse to tell kids the answer to that, but to make them work toward the answer. And then to drop in little hints as they struggle and fail to do things. Hints that are, usually some of the big gears of how the mind works, our images and our metaphors and our stories, things that stick in your brain, really just kind of open up sort of new ways for kids to think about a thing. And then turning this entire, taking this riddle and wrapping it inside of this big game where we work really intensively together to figure out the answer, and I only give kids 10 seconds to unmute themselves right when I call on them to say their answer and to remute themselves, and then I get them to instantaneously react with a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a thumbs to the side as to how they think each other's answers are, and we just stir up. Basically, it's this. What we endeavor to become in the course of this whole thing is a giant throbbing brain, and oftentimes we really succeed at that. And we kind of merge into this bigger thinking structure, and by the end of it, the kids really have achieved an understanding of some beautiful basic of science. Be it particle wave duality, which no one believes this when I just tell the student, but if kids can actually understand, if you sort of approach it by the experiments that have been done, and you offer some simple diagrams, and you get to kids to try to guess what's going to happen. Kids can actually understand particle wave duality as well as adults can. And all sorts of things like that.
And it's meant to be kind of progressive, is that right? That you start from the atomic level, with physics, and work up to chemistry, botany, zoology. That's probably way in order.
Yeah, so my life was, I have a master's degree in educational theory from the University of Washington, and I would say that the most useful thing that came of that entire master's degree was this one evening that I was in the academic library and I was looking for a very specific book, and I think I eventually found it, but what happened to be like 4 books to the left of it on the shelf was this book called Getting It Wrong from the Beginning by a guy named Kieran Egan, who's an educational philosopher in Canada. And this book pointed out how most of our basic ideas of education that we fight over now have not been great ideas and do not actually mesh well with all of the psychology that has been done since, I don't know, 1950, 1960 with the cognitive revolution and the effective turn in cognitive psychology and evolutionary psychology and developmental psychology. And that the field is just open for new sorts of teaching and learning that tap into how the mind really works. I then toured a school in Oregon that was based just on this guy's ideas. And my life was changed from that. It was just unbelievably amazing to sit in these classrooms where I was learning all of these amazing things about science or social studies, just like on a minute-to-minute basis. Everything was so fascinating. And they just used this very simple, repeatable sort of method for doing this. It's not that they had like the greatest teachers in the world. The people that they had as teachers, like, were the greatest teachers in the world before they started using this method. And realizing, like, my gosh, like, this is what I want to invest my life in. You're right, this is what I want my life to be for, is the bringing to more and more people the possibilities, opening these possibilities of what learning can become when you actually understand, how minds work. Mm-hmm. This way of approaching teaching and learning opens up all sorts of new possibilities for what kids are able to learn, even from a very early age. And our ideas of what kids can learn science-wise are shackled by these, in retrospect, ridiculous notions of what kids are able to learn. And so I realized, okay, like, if kids can really achieve a somewhat profound understanding of almost any topic, well then, like, how would we structure the sciences? Mm-hmm. And the answer that seemed obvious to me, I guess maybe I'm copying it eventually from some of the books that I've read, is to build it from the bottom up. Just go from atoms all the way up to galaxies. And so we, every month, we hit some big topic, like light, or like ice cream, or like viruses, that starts from physics, right? Or so, the atomic or the subatomic, hence light. And then it moves up to molecules, so chemistry. So our biochemistry thing this year was ice cream. And then moves up to microbiology. So this time it was viruses. And then moves after that to, let me get this right, to botany after that. And then to anatomy and physiology. Okay. And then to zoology. And then to earth sciences, then astronomy, and then all the way back at the beginning of the next year to physics again. And then, because we've every year started with this understanding of atoms, because you always just got to focus on the fundamentals, right? The fundamentals, understanding how atoms work by subatomic relationships between neutrons and protons and electrons, and then building those up to talk about chemical bonds, and all of that. Anything that you talk about later in the year, you can always then kind of build back down. You can go back down to the atoms. Mm-hmm. So right now I'm preparing for a class that starts next week, which is on volcanoes, which is, I really feel like, one of those sort of hoary old topics that everyone learns, the 3 different types of volcanoes and blah, 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 blah. Crust of the earth and mantle and whatever. And so I did this interview beforehand with the students in class to figure out, okay, like, what do you know, what do you not know about volcanoes? And none of them could tell me, why are there volcanoes? Which, man, why are there, why doesn't the lava just stay in its place, Mm-hmm. And why is lava hot? Mm-hmm. Which has to do with some very big fat atoms not wanting to, the protons kind of hating one another and not wanting to stick together in the center of the earth, and radioactive decay and all sorts of things that come from that. But we can talk about that in depth of why are there volcanoes and why is lava hot, because we have built it up in the sort of tower of all the sciences sitting together.
So do kids typically take the whole year? Can they jump in during different months? Or what's the best experience?
The best experience is to start whenever a kid is interested in starting, to continue
Fair
on
enough.
from that.
Fair enough.
Eventually, my big goal, and Collider has really factored into this. My big goal is to create 4 or 5 years of this curriculum, of these classes, of these videos, but then also, make the curriculum in a way that other teachers can use too, and then go back for another 5 years and finalize those. Teach them again and really closely interlock all of these things so that it can be assumed that if a kid, is like in like year 2 or whatever, like they've done all the things from year 1, so you can like really gel together everything that the kids are learning to give them this operating system of how the world works. This new way of understanding everything in the light of 21st century science, which I don't know that anyone has ever done that before. If you ever find anyone who has, or if anyone who's listening to this knows this, like, I would love to steal their best ideas. But when the science curriculum was set up at the beginning of the 20th century, we didn't know anything. We didn't know that there were atoms. They were just a theory at that point, and not one that was actually held in particularly high regard. We're a few years away from discovering special relativity, much less to say general relativity. We didn't know even like the modern evolutionary synthesis. We weren't that close to that. Evolution in some important ways was still a theory until like the 19-teens, 20s, 30s, 40s. And now that we know all this, and now that all the sciences have knit themselves together, have gelled together, now we actually have this amazing opportunity. I say this as a society, right? To like go back and revisit what can we do with this whole thing that we call the science education in elementary school, and see it as a way of really preparing kids to understand everything that comes after that.
And a lot of what you do is really hands-on, too. As I was seeing something about, I think it was, why is fruit sweet or something?
Yeah.
Or like everyone had to bring like a watermelon or a piece of fruit, maybe, because I think this was like a few weeks ago, so there probably was no watermelon anywhere. But like...
So you'd asked before about the kind of the different offerings that we have. So essentially we have 3 kind of different things going on for kids. One of them is just this big course that we do, and it's a 2-day-a-week, 3-week-a-month thing where we go like up this sort of tower of the sciences and go ridiculously deep into these really deep, wonderful topics. Then on the weekends we realize just right like from a small business perspective that the hardest thing for us to do was find some way of showing parents, showing kids, showing families what it is that we're doing.
You got to get the teaser to draw people into the paid content, right?
Yeah, and because what we do is so hyper interactive, screens on, kids like throwing their arms and thumbs up and down in the air and fingers and all these things. That's really
How
interactive.
do you explain it?
We can't show it either because we've taken this really hard stand on never using videos or images of kids in our business to market, to advertise. And so like how then do we get people to understand what we're doing at all? Like the words like really don't do it justice, right? Like what I'm saying right now does not really capture like what goes. So we just realized that let's just like doing like a once a weekend, like free bite of what we're doing. Call them science bites. And we have this kind of rotation of biochemical evolutionary sort of things where the one that you may have seen was why is fruit sweet? Without terribly spoiling it, it's that mother plants, right? And like the idea of a mother plant is not a concept that kids usually have in their head at the end of it, right? But plants actually do come in like mother and father, like they have sexes, they have genders. That mother plants, unlike mother mammals, want to get their kids as far away from themselves as possible. Partially to take over the world, because this is what genes do, but also because if you raise your baby under your shadow, right, like a good mammal mother might sometimes want to do, you will murder it. And so, like, plants have all these, like, sorry, I'm going to the, but like, so fruit is sweet in order to, I guess I am giving the answer to this. Fruit is sweet because, some enterprising plant back in the early Cretaceous, mid-Cretaceous, because flowering plants started then, and fruit is a type of flower, that they figured out that what they could do is hire an Uber to take their babies away, right? Like offering animals the only kind of money that animals want, which is sugar, which is energy from the sun.
Sure.
And they offer it to them on the quid pro quo that the animal will swallow their babies and then walk around and then poop them out. And so right, this contains like a bunch of ideas of evolutionary biology and biochemistry. And you can do it all within 1 hour with kids, and it's fairly vivid, easy to remember way. Just by asking a simple question and pursuing the answer, no holds barred.
And then you do this kind of with adults too. I don't know if it's the same thing. I know you have one tonight, science and beer. Right?
Yes, next week.
Science and beer.
Yeah.
Next week. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay. The next one's on the 11th. Correct?
Or the 13th.
Maybe.
It's whatever the next Thursday is.
For some reason I thought it was tonight, but it is not. It is not, yeah.
So once a month, we realized that it would be fun to offer the same thing for adults who might have that itch of geeking out about science, whether they know a lot about science or know nothing at all about science. And so for free, once a month on Thursdays, we offer this, we call it Science and Beer. And we offer it just to adults for free, and we just do the same thing with them as we do with kids. We take just some of our most fun lessons and do that with them. We just make it a game and all that. If anyone who's listening is interested in this, we actually don't have it linked on the website. Because we're kind of nervous, just like Yahoo's
it's kind of weird,
coming in,
to have
right?
with the kids stuff. I saw it on Facebook when I was looking through, and I've heard such wonderful things from everybody, from kids taking the science is weird and then the adults doing the science and beer. So
if anyone is interested, you can go to scienceisweird.com/science and beer, all one word, and I can trust. Should I trust everyone who's listening to this podcast?
Who knows? Let's see what happens.
It's too late. Let's go for it. The die is cast.
But yeah, I have to try that next time. I actually thought it was tonight, so next week would be better.
The one that we're asking too is, why do clouds float? And you think, they're very light, but
they're not.
They weigh your average cumulus cloud weighs about as much as 100 elephants. And there's a one-word answer that I think people who are really science savvy will know. But what does that mean, and how does that work? I won't say the word here. Right? Once you start asking those questions, oftentimes we find that our understanding is just verbiage deep, vocabulary deep, no deeper than that. We can get to the bottom of it though.
Yeah. No, it sounds like fun. I am gonna try it next time. Science is weird. Is this your full thing now? Are you teaching something else?
the hilarious thing is that, this just started, like I said, as this thing I posted on Facebook this one day, early on in the pandemic. The plan had been to beef up the SAT coaching business that I've done. I've spent 14 years as an SAT tutor, and it took me a long time to get really, really good at it. And but then when the pandemic, when we decided to move, we thought, okay, let's really ramp this up. Let's hire a project manager, let's hire an executive assistant, so really be able to work as part of a team, so make this a big thing. I focus on just kids who have ADHD for test prep, and I think I'm one of the 2 people in the country who do that. So it was cool, I found my niche and all of that, and then all of a sudden, the tests began to be canceled left and right, and I realized, oh my gosh, my family will starve if I don't find something else to push myself into. But then once having pushed myself into the science, realized that, man, I do not want world's greatest SAT coach on my tombstone. Right, I want to work towards something that is bigger and more game-changing, more world affirming and society bending than that. That is all a way of saying that I'm still actually doing some SAT coaching and ACT coaching on the side from that.
So I feel from learning about you, interacting with you a couple times, and learning more of your backstory, I feel like a lot of your career, there's been a lot of focused experimentation.
Huh.
Because
you should talk to my mom. It sounds like it's a great phrase to put on that. Yeah. That's fantastic.
With what you are doing with the kids and really challenging them to do that and to think critically, and with your SAT business, I believe you and your wife had a school as well.
Yeah.
And then, how do you view experimentation and its value in life and learning and just your journey as a person?
I realized a few months ago how deeply I believe in experimentation. When I had a specific lesson on a Monday morning totally go south on me, and I had no idea why, and I was ecstatic. And I realized, man, apparently I really have drunk the Kool-Aid and seen everything that I do in my life as an experiment, because this would have crushed me, for the rest of the afternoon or whatever, if it had happened to me a couple of years ago.
I feel like that's how most people are.
Oh yeah, I mean, the reason that I love doing what I do is the buzz, just to use the drug term, the high that you get when you are learning something new, and that I get when I am helping a class learn something so exciting, right? Where at the end of their lesson, right, the goal always, with I say this with my fingers crossed here, is to have their jaws literally drop open, and they go, "What? That is why cats are cute," or something like that. And when that doesn't happen, it's still kind of crippling and horrific. But I realized how much into this whole everything is an experiment, and I'm not the experiments are not good experiments when I am succeeding at doing all of the at all the lessons. If there's something that I'm doing wrong, maybe it's something that I've done before, and that's a bad thing. But when there's an actual novel mistake that I'm making, holy poop, right? Now I get to learn something. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think maybe even more sort of broadly, everything that I've done over the last couple decades has been an experiment, because I am just hungry to find out. I'm hungry to do new things, right? Hence a life of constant entrepreneurship. But also, I'm hungry to. I like your word focused experimentation. I'm hungry to, find what is the one best method, at least for me, of doing X, and I'm never happy unless I'm working closer and closer to that.
Mm-hmm. I'm reading a really great book right now called Bravey by Alexi Pappas.
I haven't even heard of this book.
It just came out in 2021. I actually just got it from the library. And it's just a wonderful book about, she's an Olympic runner, long distance runner, in Eugene, so kind of that area,
yeah.
Oregon, California, now they're in LA or whatever, but she's a writer, experienced extreme trauma growing up, but just talking about, if you, goal setting and that experimentation and that, basically, if you're succeeding all the time, your goals aren't big enough.
Yeah. Yes.
And that it's okay to not reach them, because that means you were trying really hard.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with not getting there.
Yeah.
That means you were dreaming big enough.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. I read it, for me, pretty fast in a week. So I highly recommend it, except I have the only copy right now.
I kept thinking, like, should I just put a hold on it right now as she's talking? And I thought that's actually maybe egregiously rude.
So it has to go back. It has to go back in another week anyway. So it's a very, very good book. Very sad, but very funny. And she was in the Dartmouth improv group, the same thing as like Mindy Kaling.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe not Tina Fey. Who am I thinking of?
No, because that's the one in no, Tina Fey was New York based, right? And
it was, who am I thinking of? Maya Rudolph. No, nowhere near similar except for SNL. But Maya Rudolph, I believe, is the other Dartmouth improv brigade.
oh, I thought you said Dark Nymph. I thought it was like a cool like
Dartmouth.
West Coast name.
It's
Oh,
the mask.
got it.
No, it's the mask. Dartmouth. Dartmouth.
Yeah, sorry, for everybody who's listening to this at home right now, we actually sound much clearer than this.
Yes. So, yeah, it's a great book. Highly recommend it.
This is one of the things that I always tell the students in the class that I will not tell them the answer. And that is, like, in a certain restricted way, absolutely true. Like, I never, like, just come out and tell them the answer. And then, like, the question for me, I guide them, right? And oftentimes I just lie to them. Like, if they're getting too close to the thing, like, I will tell them something that is purposefully misleading to make them, like, work harder at it and understand a deeper level of what is going on. But I always wonder, like, should I not be even telling them the answer at the end of class, right? Because what I'm trying to do, it perhaps sounds stupid, but I ask it because what I'm trying to do is have them experience science as an adventure from the vantage point that's not terribly dissimilar from the people who first figured this stuff out. And right, so I help them scale this mountain, but in order for it to be scary, there have to be stakes. We have some stakes for the gamification of how we do the riddle and blah, blah, blah. But it seems like the biggest stakes possible is that they don't know, that they don't learn what the answer is until, later I send up this PDF after every class that, like, reviews what the class is, whatever. But they have to wait for that. So I'm just trying to think about how I can make it more of an adventure for them.
I think that's true even, I don't want to say in adult science, but even in, like, research-based science. One of my family members asked me once, well, how do you know when you're right and when you're done? And I'm like, you're never right, and you're only right until someone proves you wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think anything's necessarily right. It's just your best guess with the tools that you have before you.
Yeah.
To get to that conclusion. Doesn't mean you are right.
Yeah.
But when you have multiple pieces of evidence suggesting that okay, until someone proves it wrong.
Yeah, Karl Popper, right? Falsifiability and all of that. Yeah. Which is one of the things that I feel guilty for not having gone into Karl Popper and in philosophy of science like that for the kids. Maybe at some point I'll need to do a unit and just go like, the scientific method is weird. Where we actually look at, like, how is it that scientists actually work at that. I could probably do a really good job interviewing you and Jamie together.
Oh, geez. You probably don't want to do that.
Give me senses of that. Do you find that, you are an entrepreneur, right? And you have been an entrepreneur for a long time, am I correct about that?
For at least 6, 7, 8 years.
Okay,
sure.
yeah. Did you get in it for the adventure?
Absolutely. And I find that I am a person that needs freedom and flexibility to explore.
Yeah.
And if someone tells me what to do, I have a very, very hard time with that.
Yeah.
And I used to think that was wrong because that's how life around me was structured. That someone told you what to do at your work and you did it. And I've come more and more, and even science actually fit that well because no one tells you what to do.
Yeah.
You just experiment.
Yeah.
Like, no one tells you this is how, they help guide you, but no one tells you. So I think that was a large part of it, just wanting to have that freedom and flexibility to succeed or to fail. And then it was on you. It's not on anybody else.
Yeah.
So that was really what my drive to do this was, is that I can't follow a traditional path. I mean, if I have to pay bills at some point, I'll do it until that phase is done.
Yeah.
But I can't.
Yeah. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so I was raised just with the assumption that I would start a business or 2 or 10. And I sometimes think like, oh, like what would my life be like if I just like took my curriculum architecture jobs or skills and actually got a job doing it. And I have a friend who is a curriculum architect and got a job at Amazon and really like makes a lot of money. And in some ways his life is much less stressful than mine is, but I don't think that I could do it because it wouldn't give me that sense of adventure. Every night before I go to bed, I write down on a whiteboard what it is I'm excited to go wake up and do in the morning. And then like I roll out of my bed and I go, yes, let's do this. And usually it's like crafting a lesson, you know, that is like the greatest lesson I can possibly teach on mycology or on opsins and how, you know, the retinol molecules in the eye actually crack, and that is what actually causes you to see, or whatever. And that's wonderful. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it if I was just having to do what somebody told me to do, and if I wasn't able to get ridiculously excited. Which, you know, like one of the classes that I teach that I didn't mention before is narrative theory. Right? How does a good story work? This is actually one of the things I had to learn in order to teach the SAT really, really well, because there's some stories you have to read in there. And like, how do you quickly make sense of a really deep story and actually fall in love with the story, empathize with the characters and all that. The thing that I tell, you know, I asked you, sorry, you mind if I pretend that you're a high school student?
Go ahead.
What makes a story good?
I think when you can see yourself in the story.
So, let me try this. Amanda woke up one morning, and she put on her glasses, and she put on her sparkly face mask. For those of you at home right now, you cannot see that Amanda's wearing both glasses and a sparkly face mask.
I every day, a different one. I have a couple of them.
And she went downstairs. I don't know how many levels your domicile has. Went downstairs and she went to the kitchen and she made what she made every single morning. And she picked it up out of the cabinet and she took the bowl out and she put it down. This is a boring story, right? But yeah. You can see yourself in this character who just happens to be similar in a few superficial ways to you. So what else is it that makes a story like actually engaging, even if the person has virtually nothing to do with you?
I think it's the emotional tie.
Sorry, emotional what?
An emotional tie or draw into the story.
What does that look like? Or how does an author connote that? How does an author bring that up?
I think making someone be able to feel what that person is feeling.
Yeah.
So empathy.
Yeah. Wow, no one's ever said that answer before. That's really good.
That's how we teach our pitching.
I'm wondering. Yeah. I'm wondering. So how do you like when you teach people who are pitching then? Like how do you tell them to do that?
We tell them to basically make people feel the problem, feel the pain of having the problem.
Yes. So this is what I tell my students is find the suffering. Mm-hmm. Find what the person wants and then find like the gap, the chasm that is between them and their wants. Right, like, let me pick someone who's not you. Barbara woke up and she turned the light on but could not see anything. And she like moved her hand over to touch the light switch and could not get it, and she was confused. And she happened to brush, or the side of her hand happened to brush the front of her face, and she felt that there was something on her face, and it was stiff, and it was hairy. And right now, like this is an interesting story, even though you were not she. And I realized when in entrepreneurship, right, we talk about like we want to go on this adventure. like they do in stories, like they do in adventure stories. And it turns out that the essence of making a good adventure story, really good story of any kind, is to have the protagonist suffer.
That's so true.
And this is the other side of, right, like, why some days I wish I had decided to go work as a curriculum architect at Amazon.
Yeah.
We had, well, not just us, like the entire industry of online teaching, right, worldwide online teaching, spiked up, as you might imagine, over the course of the summer. And then what you might not know is that it just tanked, just like reached rock bottom between August and September.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different reasons for that, like kids going back to school, obviously, but also like among homeschoolers, it did that. Even among like unschoolers, it did that. Zoom fatigue is another sort of hypothesis, but it doesn't really explain all the things. It's still a mystery in my mind as to exactly what happened there. But like in September and October, like we were making very, very little money. It was not a sustainable thing. And we've climbed up since then, which is great. It's really great to be high on the hog again. We just set our own record for the amount of money that we were making in a month, which just feels so awesome. Sustainable.
That's
you
great.
know? But yeah, this is the other side of entrepreneurship. For anyone who's listening who is thinking like, well, I'm on the fence as to whether I wish to become an entrepreneur or not. Like maybe the question that you should ask yourself is, how do you react to suffering? Like, can you like take it and like swing it and accept it either stoically or ironically or whatever, and see it as a potential learning opportunity, and know that your job as the protagonist is to experience agony, right? Like the word protagonist means the first in suffering, the first in agony. And if you can do that, then you might love entrepreneurship.
I think that's so true. It's so true. So I'll ask you a last question,
Sure.
kind of along those lines. You know, you said you started this summer, maybe hit a little bit of a dip in the fall, but now it's really growing.
Yeah.
What's that been like to do that in this community here, and how has the community supported that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like in retrospect, we could not have chosen a better city to move to than Rochester. If we would have known that when we were back a year and a half ago choosing towns, we just would have went, Rochester, don't even look at the other ones, just Rochester. Partly because there's so much scientific knowledge here, right? Like this place just oozes deep understanding of chemistry and of microbiology. But not just that, right? Like I'm interviewing somebody in the community who trained as a geologist next week,
cool.
and sort of helped in sort of fine-tuning the volcanoes class. So that's great. Collider is so good. Collider has been, for me, like I guess everything that the name advertises. Right, it has been this place, this milieu, even when it's not a physical place, of just smacking together with other really fantastic and interesting people in the community. Jamie is a one-man spider. I just like imagine like him at like the center of like this giant web of people that he is eager to connect together. We have gotten a number of like specific clients, right? Families signed up for classes from Rochester and elsewhere because of Collider, but also like opportunities to go and speak at schools and do big events, like to run these sort of games for entire schools, and just like like you need your cheers, you need your sort of your third place where you can make friends with people, kind of oddball people, kind of serious people, kind of frivolous people, just all sorts of people.
Those sad protagonists.
Yeah, and protagonists who are on the top of the world, right? Like in different days of the week. Just a fantastic Do people listen to this podcast who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs?
That's the main audience.
Oh, great! Very good. That's sort of the sense that I got. My goodness, what are you doing if you have not been a part of Collider? It is cheap to get a virtual chair, whatever we call them. It is cheap to do it, and it is so good. That is my advice. That's my advice. Right?
And you started here when it was very slow. I mean, usually this place was packed.
Yeah.
So,
So I hear. So everybody tells me. I don't know.
Someday, maybe in the fall, not maybe, in the fall, it'll be like that again. So, yes. Well, this was such a great conversation.
This is
Jake.
fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
For people listening, where can they find Science is Weird? Where's the best place for them to go?
ScienceIsWeird.com.
All right.
Yeah.
And Science and Beer on Facebook, right?
ScienceIsWeird.com/science and beer. All one word is
beer.
probably the easiest place to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for this conversation,
Thank
Jay
you.
Brandon.
What a fun conversation with Brandon today. You can find out more about Science is Weird in the show notes, so check it out and learn more about this local business. We have many more stories of entrepreneurship on our website at rochesterrising.org, so check out more stories like Brandon's there. And we come out with a new podcast every Wednesday, so make sure that you are subscribed and never miss any of our podcasts, learning more about entrepreneurship and the culture of business development here in Rochester. All right, that's a wrap for us on the podcast today. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending a little bit of your time today with us. We would really, really appreciate if you subscribe to this podcast and rate this podcast so that others can find it. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll be here next Wednesday with a brand new episode.